though is like, as you're sitting around the table, I mean, for me to like check out everybody's responses as you're talking about something is too hard. But, well,
Mike,
anyway.
are we live?
We're live.
Okay.
All right. I'll go ahead and call to order the April 15th meeting of the Chagrin Falls Board of Education. Ms. Brudenell, please take the roll.
Mr. Rankin.
Here.
Mr. Kanzinger.
Here.
Mrs. Bros.
Yes, here.
Mrs. Garvey.
Here.
Mrs. O'Toole.
Here.
If you would please join me in saying the Pledge of Allegiance. Uh-oh. Whoa. I pledge allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the
Flag
of
of the
the
United States of America and to the
to the
republic
republic
for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, thank you very much. I'll change background real quickly. All right, fantastic. We'll move on to board reports. Mrs. O'Toole, if you'd like to start us off.
But I unmute myself. No report this time.
All right. For either the audit committee or the board policy committee?
Correct. Well, policy, we can talk about the policies that are on for update when we get to that part of the agenda.
Okay, great. Mrs. Garvey, Business Advisory Committee and Capital Planning, and Board Finance and Budget Committee.
There's no meeting upcoming for the Business Advisory Committee, but Capital Planning and the Board Finance both have meetings that are pending. Capital Planning will have a Zoom meeting that is scheduled on Tuesday, April 28th at 4:30 to review summer projects for 2020 and then projects and budgets for the 5-year forecast May update. The Board Finance and Budget Committee has a meeting that's in the midst of being scheduled for the week of May 11th, and that will be to review the 5-year forecast May update.
Okay, thank you. For Records Retention Committee, we have no report this meeting. Now we're going to move on to Superintendent's report, and I'm going to turn the meeting over to Dr. Hunt. Ooh.
Bob, your mic's
Muted.
muted.
You know, I do about 10 of these a day. You think I would have figured that out. Okay. I'm going to provide a brief update and certainly answer any questions that you might have. I know that we want to spend a lot of time talking under Mrs. Brudenell's report tonight. So just a couple of updates from the district, and you may have seen both in California and in Minnesota, they're starting to release reentry plans specific to schools. And these plans are kind of acknowledging, or I don't know if recognizing or planning that the opportunity, it may be that we have to re-enter school in a gradual manner, honoring and requiring social distancing. So I just wanted to put it on your radar. You're going to start to see some of that probably more in the media and what that could look like. We have started those conversations with our administrative team on, you know, what impact would that have in how we would normally do school, and, you know, how would we reimagine school if that is the case coming into the fall. So those conversations have started internally. Again, I have no indication from the state of Ohio at this time, but I think, you know, from a media perspective, you'll start to hear some of it.
Is that, just so I understand, does that mean there'd be smaller class sizes to keep social distancing?
Yeah, so they're essentially saying that they're, you know, one of their plans is to re-enter school with social distancing requirements. So they threw out examples like you'd have, you know, half of your students report on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, then Tuesday, Thursday, doing every other, you know, week kind of schedule. Limit, you know, cafeteria gatherings, no, obviously assembly gatherings, you know, games, sports activities, those types of things would be limited. I don't want to kind of overreact. Okay. And yeah, I just want you to know that if and when you see that, because it'll start to, you know, come out, we are having those conversations. So we would be prepared if that is the case in the state of Ohio.
Bob, for these schools, are they talking about it for the fall or for reentry this spring?
Well, I thought I heard today Florida was actually talking about reentry this spring, but California and Minnesota, the way I understand it, are talking about this lingering into the fall with not an official return to school until October, in a more traditional sense. So preparing to open in this manner early next year. Again, I don't want to create concern. I've heard nothing about that at the state of Ohio, but I do want to start working and preparing if that was, and some reality that we had to face as a school district. Any other comments or questions there?
Would part of the plan be that some kids can do complete flex learning? So they wouldn't need to come to school at all, or is that?
Yeah, it's probably premature for me to
Okay.
wait and say that's, there. I think certainly everything's on the table right now. We asked principals to start to think about this, begin, having conversations with their leadership teams in their buildings. And we would come back probably in May, start to vet some of the ideas and start to prepare this as we go kind of towards the summer. And obviously if, things change, which they seem to do every day with this being such a fluid situation, hopefully that's not necessary and it's just good planning ahead of time, but we don't need to do it.
Okay.
Okay. Secondly, I shared survey results with you in last week's board report. Those have all been reviewed by building leadership teams, and modifications are being implemented based on those results. There's certainly an effort to kind of increase the interaction opportunities with students and teachers and increase video usage, recorded lessons, that type of things, as well as providing greater flexibility with work completion. I can just tell you from a parent side, I'm already seeing these things being implemented throughout the district. And, this is kind of an evolving process, and we'll continue to solicit feedback as we kind of go through it and make modifications that we might need to. Just update on master schedules. High school had a meeting, I think last week. They have an initial build of their master schedule. Middle school is starting that process as well. So although probably a little bit behind our typical timelines, the master schedules for next year are being built out and being prepared. Elementary staffing is being finalized, and they'll build their schedules and classes kind of as we move into May. Talked about the use of educational aids. All of the educational aids that were in buildings are now plugged into at-risk students. At-risk does not mean just special education students. That's any student that's struggling online. So those introductions and meetings have all taken place, and those aids are supporting students that are having trouble in this environment. So I thought it was important to bring that to the board's radar as well. And then we're kind of working on looking at what point do we make a decision to start to move ahead with some of our smaller summer projects that we can handle internally with staff, and some of our summer cleaning. This is part of a cost reduction strategy. If we were able to get summer cleaning done kind of prior to and get ahead of that with our current staff, we could limit the number of summer help hires that we have to bring in. So we're working on that. There's kind of obviously the risk reward, if May 4th or May 1st, the governor announces we're coming back to school and we had started that work, some of that might be work that, we'll have to redo, but we are having those conversations as well. And then finally, just from your perspective, and I'll ask at the end of the meeting for a potential date for a special meeting. We continue to have dialogue with our union leadership in the area of teacher evaluation and supplementals, mostly specific to spring sports with supplementals. I think we're pretty well off in terms of our agreement of where supplementals should be paid out in the other areas. And probably the biggest issue with spring sports is the Ohio High School Association has yet to cancel spring sports. So that is still hanging out there. So that one may continue to be on hold while, those decisions are being finalized at the state level. And we know what kind of level of commitment our coaches would need to have in the spring. So I'm happy to answer any questions about those items or any other item that you may have a question about. And if not, that would conclude my report.
For the high school master planning, are you still moving forward with the alpha testing for some of those hybrid classes?
Yeah, so we're tentatively scheduling those in. Most of the teachers kind of had tested or solicited feedback from students that would be interested, so we know that. We did push that board presentation. We're going to bring that to you at the May meeting, where we kind of go through that. What seemed very progressive about a month and a half ago doesn't seem so progressive anymore, but we'll bring that forward to the board and kind of review those options. But they are scheduling in a manner that they could run those if we decide on that night that makes sense.
Okay. Will students have the option? Will they know what they're signing up for in those cases? Or will it just look like the normal class, typical class?
So some of the teachers had those students and they're rolling forward into an additional course. So they've already kind of checked with students and have a list of them.
Okay.
And I believe what Monica will do in the courses that isn't the case is if you're in the class, you'll be kind of invited to see if you want to participate. And then there'll be some kind of process they go through to make sure the parents and students understand kind of what they're signing up for.
Okay.
Hey, Bob, you mentioned some of the at-risk students, and I'm just curious, in the electronic environment, has the profile of some of those students shifted? Have students that are at risk when they're live in the classroom become more intensified being electronic? I'm just curious what the profile of that student is now versus live.
So I guess it would depend how you defined at risk. So you have students that are receiving, let's say, tier 2 intervention services in reading and math. A lot of those students are engaged, they're completing their interventions, they're showing up, and so those students are participating. Some students, we do have students that are completely off the grid. We're chasing down parents, we're chasing down students. Some of the people that were struggling have reached out to us, and those are probably the best case scenarios because you've got the parent on board. They appreciate the support. They facilitate a meeting with the aide. They schedule a daily check-in. Aide helps them prioritize their day and go through their schedule. So I would say that the students that are typically struggling are still struggling, maybe in the online environment, but our numbers are not significant. But this is a totally different learning environment, and it's not for everyone, and we understand that. And we also understand this isn't our ideal environment, but we're doing the best we can to reach out and support parents and students as well.
Mm-hmm.
Where are you on the high school students and their transcripts? And are you considering any sort of adjustment to grades or?
Yeah, so in terms of high school schedule, just the schedule, you're going to get something in your board report tomorrow that is prepared to go out to AP students that are in AP classes that speaks to kind of when they would finish their traditional coursework and how they would kind of go through this spring. In terms of grades, we spent a lot of time dialoguing. There's a really strong feeling administratively that we need to retain a grading structure and not go to pass-fail for a variety of reasons. So we have vetted that and continue to move forward with grades as they traditionally have been offered to the students. Okay, that would conclude my report, Mr. Rankin.
All right, thank you, Mr. Hunt. At this time, I'll turn it over to Ms. Brudno for the treasurer's report.
Okay, so my computer has still been just randomly shutting me off. So everybody just wave if all of a sudden you can't hear me. So first of all, part of our jobs as administrators in the district and as just being stewards of tax dollars is to always be looking for cost savings, looking for areas where we can gain efficiencies, and making our decisions, our daily decisions with that stuff in mind. The board, as you guys know, you asked Dr. Hunt and I at the beginning of the year to kind of dig deeper, look further and see what kind of savings we could find. So we've been working on that all year long. We have identified approximately $300,000 in savings / cost avoidance. in items and decisions that have already been made. So these are things that we're already working on implementing. Ideas like, for example, I know we talked about this earlier. There have been reports that we did an audit of our aid positions and those responsibilities and duties and the workload there. The result of that audit is to reduce a couple positions that result in about 1 FTE, which is a savings of about $23,000.
Ashley, can I interrupt you for a second?
Absolutely.
What was the total amount that you started off with that you said you've already identified?
So the items I'm going to talk about right now are items we're already implementing, and it's about $300,000.
Okay.
Which is kind of, you know, where our goal was. We have other ideas and some things that are not implemented yet, and I'll get to those. But right now, I'm just going to tell you about what we're already implementing. So there's the savings from the aid audit. The middle school French position was moved this year to a half-time position that saved about $25,000. High school social studies next year, we have decided that that position is not going to be replaced. That's an FTE that's a little over $75,000 is the number that I'm using for estimation for an FTE for a certified position. That's salary and benefits. Another FTE as a result of some internal movement as a result of a middle school science position. And then just holding all of the budgets flat. Building principals and department heads are working on their budgets right now for next year. Those are all being held flat. And I'm estimating that savings is about $100,000. That's probably conservative, given some of the budgets and the direction that they have gone over the past several years. So holding those flat, I'm using $100,000 as my estimate, but I think that's probably conservative. So those items add up to $299,000. So those are items that we're already implementing. Those are things we're already doing. In addition, as part of what we've been working on all year and looking at, we have several items that we are considering, but those final decisions have not been made. In this category, I'm including the self-insurance, switching that to a self-funded model rather than a fully insured model. Estimates on that, we're looking at about $125,000 a year savings in just fees. And then the real savings come from the difference that we would pay in funding the program in right now what we call premiums. And we would still probably use the term premiums, but when you're self-funded, you're not really paying a premium to an insurance company. But the difference between what we funded and what our claims would be, if our history is a good example of our future, then we could see up to $1 million a year in savings there. That's potential. Obviously, that's not exact. We don't know. We could have a bad year in insurance if we have a lot of claims. But I would say at least $500,000 in savings there, potentially $1 million a year. And then we've done things like we're looking at the copier contracts, looking to see if there's some savings there. We did an audit of where all of our copiers are. That's kind of been put on hold right now only because of the COVID-19 response. And then things like PE waiver, we're doing a feasibility study on a potential buyout, which may be beneficial to us and to some of our teachers and classified staff as well. And then looking as also at some of our contracts.
Ashley, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Were the PE waiver and the potential buyout the same thing?
No. I'm just going through my list. I have notes here.
Thank you.
No, those are not the same thing. Potential buyout is we're working on a feasibility study, and they've asked for information that we have to provide as to the ages of our employees and salaries and leave balances and things like that.
Hey, Ashley, sorry to interrupt,
Yes.
but one key question. So what's your base? What are you comparing to? Is it current year? Is it forecast?
So I'm talking forecasted, and some of these decisions are just, for example, like when we're reducing an FTE, that one's simple. That's we're down a person. If we had to replace that, we would replace it with, another full-time teacher at the lower end of the scale, most likely. So, the numbers are estimates, but based on forecasted amounts.
Gotcha. But all these numbers, these are all relative to next year's forecast.
Right.
Not current year actual, next year's forecast.
Yeah.
Which is your budget, which is, everything that it rolled up to what we've been looking at.
Right.
Okay.
And okay, so then where was I? Looking at our contracted services, some of the items that we're contracting for right now, our maintenance and facility contract is a very large contract. We're looking to see if there's any savings to be had there. I don't have numbers on any of this yet, but I just wanted you to be aware of what's on our radar and what we're looking at. Some of these could be big dollars. Self-insurance, I think, is the largest potential savings for us. But, that decision has not been made yet. So there's that category. Then I kind of wanted to touch real quick just on savings that are going to be realized this year, just as a result of our response to COVID-19. There are some things that we are not going to be spending money on now as we're not operating like we normally would. So things like fuel savings, we're not running our buses. That's going to save us about $25,000 this year. There's reduction in overtime. There's trips for drivers who are typically, picking up trips, taking sports teams to away games and field trips and things like that. That's a significant savings. We're not using as many subs, so that's going to be some savings. Now that savings right there is going to be offset though by unemployment costs. So substitutes can apply for unemployment, and they are applying, and that does cost us money. But I think the net effect there still is going to be a pretty significant savings. Reduction in our trash, recycling, pickup, things like that. Chris and I spoke today. He thinks we're going to save about $4,000 just on trash pickup because we've reduced the number of collections. And then some contracts and things for services that we're no longer using because we're not in our normal session. It's going to be about another $20,000 is what we're estimating. And then Dr. Hunt spoke earlier about potentially doing some of our summer projects and utilizing our current staff to do those and not having to hire the casual labor for the summer. If we are expecting to be down about 9 people, average of 8 weeks of employment, 40 hours a week at $10 an hour, we're looking at saving a little over $14,000 there.
What was your grand total on the COVID-19 potential?
Potential savings is approximately $200,000 there.
Okay.
Now that's one time, that doesn't carry forward every year, obviously. Right. But it's, it's real dollars. It's offset by things like unemployment. Obviously, we've got some increased legal costs because, this is a new situation for all of us. We're having to talk to our attorneys a little bit more, just making sure that we're doing things properly. But overall, it will be a significant savings for us. So I will include that in our 5-year forecast. When you see the May forecast, it's going to look different than it did in November. So that being said, we are certainly in a different environment than we were a month ago when we were having conversations, and we put a lot of work and a lot of time into determining what our need was and what the right answer was for going on the ballot. I don't think it's news to anybody that we're going to have to kind of start that conversation over. The need is the same. The need was real. I don't think that changes, but I think how we get there is going to have to change. I don't think anybody would disagree that it's probably not the most responsible thing to go ask our taxpayers for 7.9 mils right now. So in addition to all of the savings and cost avoidance items that we've been putting together all year, over the last couple of weeks, we've kind of started looking at additional items and looking for areas where we can kind of still get to where we need through a different manner. We're still going to get to the same point, or we have to get to the same point. We're going to have to do it through savings rather than through millage if we need to change that that levy decision. So we do have a list of things kind of started between Dr. Hunt and myself, between cabinet members as well. We've started the conversation with other administrators where we've asked the principals to kind of, look and see what they think, if they have any creative ideas for us. These are items that they're going to affect the programming. They're going to affect the product that we offer our student. There's just no way around it. The items that we came up with throughout the year were with the goal of not impacting students, not impacting the classroom. And I think we did a pretty good job of, making decisions and finding dollars there. But beyond that, decisions are going to have to be made to reduce some expenditures that, these are items that are going to affect the classroom. I don't know how much detail I can provide on that at this point. I do have some dollars applied to some things, but it's more just sort of FTE level.
Ashley,
We're working.
Can I chime in?
Yeah.
I feel like we didn't need to get to that level of detail in this discussion today, but just to kind of back you up, I think we're looking at a down economy. We don't know how long that is going to last. It's our job to prepare for the worst and hope for the best. We certainly have done a lot of work to show what we need in our district to keep functioning and churning out these high-performing students. But now, unfortunately, the work of the backup plan needs to happen. So we ideally would have an additional, I think we settled on around 7.9 mils coming in either through a fall or a spring levy. If that were to not materialize, we need to be prepared with a backup plan.
Right.
So of course we would go back to our voters, but in the interim, to have some staged idea of what types of expenditure cuts would be needed. And you've started that already. I think you've done a great job. To say that we've already found around $500,000 that will immediately impact the next fiscal year is a great step, because that buys us a little bit of breathing room, probably not all the breathing room that we need. We probably do need to find some additional cuts. So that's kind of stage one. And then if we plan to go to if we do go to the voters and are not successful, that would be our stage two. And that would be the deeper level of cuts, I think, that you're talking about that would impact programming. So I think for today's discussion, we probably need to focus a little bit more on the big picture, which is what is our plan for the timing and the amount of the next levy? What do we think has the most likelihood of being successful? I know you've done a lot of analysis and we have a pretty good sense of how the timing and the millage will affect our revenues. And then to talk about the backup plan and what we need to do now. And I just want to remind everybody, we're unlike a lot of other businesses where our expenditure cuts are not often, they don't often have an immediate impact. We often have to plan ahead a year or more to really achieve cost savings that has an impact on our bottom line. So that's it. I just wanted to chime in and add those comments. And maybe we could turn the discussion more to the levy timing and millage, and then the scenarios with these, potential backup plans in place.
Yeah, so just to remind everybody, we do have the 3.85 mils that's falling off. So that would be sort of a no new tax. 3.85 mils would be keeping everyone whole. People's taxes would not go down, but they wouldn't go up. So I think we need to keep that in mind. And whatever the decision is, whatever direction we go is obviously going to have to be some sort of combination of all of these items that we're working on identifying, and then potential millage.
So Ashley, I don't want to put you on the spot, but you may have your spreadsheet open.
I don't, but I can open it.
If we were fortunate enough for the community to support us with a 3.85 mil levy this fall, and we implement the savings that you've identified, I think you found 300 that would be year over year coming out, and then an additional 200 or 300, 200 for the COVID-19. So just with those, so kind of the immediate cost savings that you've already identified that we will be implementing no matter what, when would the next levy need to happen under that scenario?
Would that be without additional cuts
Right.
coming into fiscal year 21 and 22?
Correct.
To be clear?
Right. So just a baseline. If we pass 3.85, we cut 300 off of the bottom line going forward, plus an additional 200 this year. Where does that put us in our cycle?
You're basically calling that what we know right now, phase one with 3.8.
Right.
I would say probably 2 years. There's a potential for 3 depending on I think a lot of other things. We don't know how this is going to affect our state revenue. We don't know, I think I heard the statistic the other day that, state money towards schools in total has been cut once over the last 30 years, but there are a lot of people saying that that's going to happen. So that's, that would really affect us. The other thing is how bad the economy gets affects how our collections happen in taxes. So just because we're levying a certain amount of taxes doesn't mean we get that. As the economy goes down, people can't pay their taxes, and then there are more delinquencies and we collect less. So that's kind of, a variable that we can't really predict very well. So I would say 2 years. I think we could do that. And I think 3 would be a possibility.
So would it be appropriate to frame that from a kind of a higher level? If we went for 3.85 with what we've already put into place, most of which wouldn't require action because we've done most of it through attrition throughout the course of this year.
Mm-hmm.
To get to 3, we would have to move to an additional level of reductions and coming into the spring of next year. So if the board said we need to get to 3 years, for us to safely do that, we would have to institute some of the reductions in fiscal year 21 and 22 to get and extend there.
Some. I don't think it would be I don't think we would have to go to the really painful, large cuts just to get to the 3 years. But again, not knowing what's happening on the revenue side, I don't want to promise that.
Ashley, just to clarify, so if we do 3.85 and you're saying we can get to 2 years, that's just with the 300,000 that have already been put into place plus the 200 from COVID. So we still have this list of ideas that you're looking at working, which
Correct.
would also
Yes,
use 3 years. Okay.
Yes, and I think, I think we really need to, I would really recommend moving forward on moving to a self-insured model on our health insurance. I think those are huge dollars that we should be taking advantage of. And I think that would really help. I think that would get us to where we want to be, maybe further.
Yeah, I think that it's prudent to look at those additional items, stage 2, 3, stage 3. And I think we've got to. I don't have all the experience. I don't know what our collections were doing, like the downturn of 2018, but I think we would be too aggressive to assume that our revenues just hold steady because, people are putting off their mortgages for 6 months. It's going to affect taxes.
Mm-hmm. Agree.
So, yeah, I think we've got to keep going. We've got to keep looking at these stage 2 and stage 3 actions.
I think it's also important, we approach this that we want to make sure that the board sees as real dollars and they're conservative. So we believe that probably achieve more in what you will see when we kind of bring this list to you, and that they're real dollars. I know there's energy savings. We have that item on the list. I'm never a big fan of energy saving dollars, but what we bring to you will equate to helping us extend the levy if that's what we decide to try to do.
Okay.
I have a question on verbiage. Should we be saying this is a no new tax or a no new money levy if we did 3.85? Because I think to me, I would call it out if someone said to me it's no new tax. I'm voting on
Right.
it.
It's no additional cost.
Right. So
Yeah.
we refer to it as no new money or no additional cost levy, not a no new tax.
Right.
Okay.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, Greg, I think that's important because there are people that are confused. Even they think, none of the levies in Chagrin are renewable, and a lot of people think we have renewable levies. So I think it's important to be very specific.
Ashley, I had a question about the self-insurance.
Mm-hmm.
So rather than pay the premiums, we have to set the money aside in a fund or something. Mm-hmm. And then the claims get paid out, but the claims are going to lag. So we're just going to have to estimate our savings.
Yeah.
But we really wouldn't know the savings until at least well into the next year.
Right. We wouldn't know for sure. What I would say is in the first year, we would keep our premiums where they're at. That's what we're already used to. And then that way we put that into a self-insurance fund and the claims get paid out of the self-insurance fund. So we would estimate, we would be able to forecast exactly what we're paying out of the general fund that year because we pay it out of the general fund into another fund. Where that fund goes then is where, we don't really know what's going to happen. We are required to maintain a certain balance. So if we had a catastrophic year and it went below the required amount, we would have to cover that through the general fund.
Right.
But
how long after a year end are the claims from the previous year still showing you? Would you know? I don't know.
I would have to ask the consultants. I'm not sure.
Okay. All right.
I want to say
there's some things you just can never
I want to say 3 months because I feel like I've heard them say that before, but I'm not positive on that.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, but it'd all be based on actuarial calculations, right?
I'm sorry, say that again.
I said the liability would be based upon actuarial calculations. Instead of premiums, instead of paying the insurance company premiums, we'd be making our own actuarial calculations and setting a reserve.
Right. We wouldn't be doing it ourselves. No, we would have professionals. Yeah. I would not be doing that myself. So what they prepare for us is what they call a fully insured equivalent. So they would have the insurance company say, if you were fully insured, this is what we would be charging you for your premiums. And then we take it from there.
Right.
And so, yeah, so if we switched in January of 21, we would be putting premiums from our general fund into the self-insurance fund for January. And in January, we're not really going to have any claims, because claims that you're paying out in January are from things that happened in November, December, October, November, December. So for the first few months, we're not going to have large claims payments because it's going to be paid on the old plan. So it wouldn't be paid out of our self-insurance fund yet. It would be for claims and items that started happening in January. We would start paying those. So we probably wouldn't really start paying claims until, I don't know, March, April.
And I think it's important to reiterate that Ashley has experience with this type of insurance. So this isn't, there's a comfort for me in that. She's worked with the organizations in the past to set it up and manage it and understands what we're looking at.
Right. And I think there's a misconception too, that we're acting as an insurance company and paying doctors. And I would not be taking that on and writing checks to the doctors and the hospitals and all that. We would still use an insurance company. They would still manage it for us. We just would they would pay those doctors. And then every week I would then pay them what they paid out.
And we participate in other pooled funding resources to help manage the risk.
I missed that. You cut out there.
And also that we participate in pooled programs to mitigate the risk on the district side.
Right. So we would have additional insurance on a per employee basis or per covered life basis, and then per in the aggregate. So we would have insurance over and above if our claims went, if we had a catastrophic claim for an individual that was over whatever amount we insured them, our insurance was, then that insurance would cover that. And then we purchase that in the aggregate as well. So if our claims go over, I don't know, however many millions we purchase, then that insurance would cover it. So then that would no longer come out of so we can calculate a max payment, because we would know what our max would be, because once it hit that level, then the other insurance would cover it.
So I feel like we're getting a little bit into the weeds on the cost savings, which I know we want to explore even further, but if we can kind of stay up at the level of strategy. I know I've been doing a lot of thinking about this, if we're going to approach our voters with something different in the next 12 months, what should that look like? And what is the impact then on our forecast? So I ran some really simple, high level, what would our revenues have been if we had been successful this fall with 7.9 mils, which is kind of where we were headed. The total revenues, and this is all high level, just so we can all maybe get our head wrapped around this, is about 17.8 million that would have been additional tax revenues over the course of the 5-year forecast. If we go to our voters with less millage this fall and then supplement it in 3 years with, I would assume something around 7.9, again, just for purposes of illustration, our total revenues are about 12 million. So we have about a $5.6 million change in what our revenues would be over the next 5 years. Another scenario that I think we're considering is going to the voters in the spring, hoping that sometime either in the spring of 21 or the fall of 21, the economic environment and the political environment will be more settled. If we were to do that, I would recommend we go for what we need, the 7.9 mils. If those were successful, if one of those were successful, we would bring in about 12.6 million over the course of our 5-year forecast. So it still leaves us about 5.2 million short of what I would call our optimal situation. So interestingly, the second scenario actually puts us in a better position just by $500,000, not a lot, but a little bit. And both scenarios show us needing to be prepared for 5 million over the course of the 5-year forecast in cost cutting that we might need to undertake. Does that help people to see it a little bit more clearly, the decision that we're trying to make?
Well, Catherine, frankly, I'm a bit surprised. I was expecting to hear Ashley and Bob talk to us about that, when I think you're talking about something like we've already discussed this in public, and I'm just hearing this kind of now. So I did not know we were already talking about changing the time of the levy and things like that.
I think in our initial and all the work that we put into this to get to this point, or the point that we were. Thank you all for all the waving. I think we demonstrated and we showed pretty clearly that, the longer we wait, the more millage we need. So in order to make up that deficit, even if we do go to voters next year instead of waiting 2 years, say we did the 3.85 that's falling off, taxpayers stayed even, taxes didn't go up for them. We went back next year, we would still need to implement, even if we went for 7.9, we would still need to implement savings to make up that shortfall. Does that make sense? I know sometimes I start talking and I start talking in circles, but so I think we all agree that 7.9 this November, it is not a responsible decision now. The world is completely different than it was a month ago when we thought that was the direction that we were going. So I think, we're kind of starting back we're back at the starting gate and kind of starting over.
Well, I think it's an evolution. I mean, you did a lot of phenomenal work, and we were at a good place, and the world changed. We still have all that information. Now we're just trying to figure out how we're going to pivot with the current situation and do what we can to help alleviate things from a taxpayer perspective.
Right. So is the plan for the board finance and the capital planning groups, or I guess really the board finance, to get back together and basically have a recommendation of how to move forward?
No,
or is that...
I would, that's not the responsibility of that committee. That's the responsibility of the board. That committee can give us input and look at the changes to our 5-year forecast based on what we're talking about. But as far as a levy, timing and amount, and the measures that we need to undertake for cost reductions, I think that lies with the board.
The other question I have about November versus spring in terms of timing is, what does a levy even look like in November? I mean, I don't imagine people are going door to door.
No, it's going to be, I would imagine it's a complete, I think all campaigns are going to slowly start to move towards, mail-in ballot. That is going to be where your focus area is on campaign. Messaging is probably a little different. But I think the campaign for November is going to look very different than you would see. It can't be as aggressive in your face and out and about, I don't think, based on what I'm at least starting to understand about where we might be in October or November. It's going to have to look very different.
So is there a benefit to us just from implementing a levy, or for the levy committee that does the district levy? Is there a benefit to doing this in the spring?
I think the spring you could have the same issue, but my recommendation is you want to begin the election that has the most turnout. So I would strongly recommend November because you're gonna have the most turnout. I think in the spring it'd be much harder to get the message out if you're not going door to door, and you can't go door to door. Whereas I think almost everyone's gonna be voting in November. regardless.
The difference in revenue from November to spring as well, remember, is a full year's collection. That also would see taxpayers with their taxes going down because the 3.85 mils comes off. And then in the following year, going back up to the 3.85 mils. So the 3.8, if that's where we went. But the 3.85 mils, if we were to stay at that level, that would keep the tax bill even.
And
So they're not going to see that dip and then new taxes again.
Yeah, and you're saying to keep it from being, a dip in the property tax bills, it would have to be voted on in November.
Yes.
Right?
Correct.
Okay. Gotcha.
But don't forget, we're also collecting less millage until we go back to the voters again. So it's more than that 1 year delay. The 3.85 at full capacity is bringing in about 3 million a year versus a 7.9 that brings in about 5 million a year. So we've got to look at it as more than that. It's a delay, plus it's less taxes for 2 more years because we wanted to make this a 3-year cycle, I heard potentially. So we have to look at it more holistically.
Yeah, I'm wary of letting that 3.85, slip away, because once from somebody who just gets their tax bill, and I'm sure most people all pay very close attention, but for those that have it in their tax bill, to see a decline, if you see a decline, it's going to be hard to get it back. If it just stays steady, it's going to be easier to take. They're never easy to take, but that's going to be easier to take because it's going to mean no change.
Right. I would think if we waited to the spring, we would have to go a little more than 3.85.
Yeah, it's going to be more of
You
more of
would.
a, you're going to have to convince somebody of it.
I agree, Mary Kay. I think if we wait till next year, we should ask for at least 7.9 or what we think we need. And there's definitely some messaging. If we allow these mills to fall off and people are paying less taxes, we certainly need to remind them of that in the spring, the cost savings that we realized through all the hard work of our administration, as well as the fact that some of their taxes did fall off. I think there's a way to message it. It may not be as strong as this is replacing millage that's falling off. But to me, I'm looking at the noise, the uncertainty. I think when you have a lot of uncertainty in the economy and in the political arena, it just is a bad time to try to convey a message to the voters. And then you look at, what Bob pointed out, that we won't be face to face. This is going to be phone calls and postcards. And, my concern is that it's going to be very, very difficult for us to convey any message, and that the sentiment due to the uncertainty in the economy and people's jobs is just going to incite people to vote no on something that they may not understand.
I mean, the challenging part of this is you don't know what it's going to look like next spring either.
Yeah, you have the same issue on the spring.
We're all projecting that out, and that's what makes this a difficult decision. Can I try to see if I have consensus on it's either 3.85 in the fall or 7.9 in the spring?
I would say at least 7.9 in the spring. But yes, I agree with what you just said.
So what we might want to do is then look at, assuming a 7.9, I'm assuming if you're going to go for that in the spring, you want to be able to message and communicate that you can get to 4 years. What level of cuts would we have to make that happen? And then a 3.85, and I'm assuming the board would like to see 3 years if that's what we go for. What level of cuts is necessary for that? Maybe that helps inform your decision.
Yeah, I'd like to see that.
Okay, so 3.85 in the fall. What cuts to get how long? 3 years?
3 years.
Okay. And then if we were to go in the spring for 7.9, you want it to go 4 years.
I'm posing it for conversation. Yeah.
Ashley, thank you for putting that together. I'm sure your numbers will be much more robust than what I threw together as I was just trying to work through this in my own head. But I think we're going to find over the course of 5 years, it's around $5 million in the difference versus us going out this fall. So it's a little bit of a comfort level of how much we eat into our cash balance, but I think we're looking at least $1 million a year over the next 5 years to get us to the ideal,
And as you worst case scenario, both of these, I think that has to come into it. A 3.85 failure in the fall probably puts you at 7.9 in the spring, where you were talking about being. 7.9 in the spring, failure goes 7.9 in the following November. And if that fails, you're talking about catastrophic cuts. I mean, we all need to understand that.
Yeah.
And we all also have to remember that, I mean, our budget, our expenses are primarily, it's people. So we can make all these little cuts to little programs, but the majority will have to come from salaries and benefits, which means people.
Yep.
Absolutely.
And potentially, right? I mean, we're obviously relying on the administration to make recommendations. I think the board needs to set the direction for where the budget needs to be. And then obviously, the administration needs to look at those hard trade-offs. It is very heartening to hear that there could be potentially $1 million a year just in the health insurance. That would be a great result if that's where we end up. But I think at the board level, we need to help just set the direction and then rely on Bob and Ashley to make the recommendations about where they feel the cuts would be the least negative to the district.
Right. We would create that list of cuts in a priority order, least painful at the top and going on down.
Well, and that's part of what's in, just so what's on my mind a little bit. Part of my concern is that unknown of that savings. I mean, so I play out in my head 3.85, passes, and we do experience let's just say $1 million in healthcare savings. Then maybe that financial picture looks much different than maybe we don't achieve that much. I mean, but the flip side of that argument is you wait and you see what that savings looks like, and then maybe you can go for less in the spring. So there's no clear-cut decision here. This is really about being really thoughtful, not only on the financial side of making sure we're hitting targets and stretching every dollar and getting as far as we can for our community. But then there's the whole messaging side. What story do you tell, and how does that play out? That we need to keep in our mind as well.
So Ashley, just to reconfirm, you're looking at potentially a 3.85 this fall, and what would be required to stretch it 3 years? So we wouldn't go out again until the fall of 23.
Or spring.
Or spring.
Spring too. They wouldn't collect till the following year.
Yeah.
But from the voter standpoint, you're coming back 2.5 years.
I think our voters know by this time, no matter when we have a levy, it doesn't collect till the next January.
Yeah, when I run scenarios, it's on a calendar year. So
right.
I mean, when we would put it on the ballot would be a discussion amongst the board, but it doesn't affect the scenario.
Okay.
Okay.
We need to take action July to be on the ballot in November.
August 5th is the deadline for the last resolution that would need to be filed with the county. We have to do 2 resolutions, so in July would need to be the first one. Yes.
So we don't have another meeting currently until May 6th. And I think we're all going to need time to process the information that you're bringing forward. I'm wondering if we should consider having a special meeting. I don't know how much time, Ashley, you need to prepare this stuff, but even the last
I'll
week.
have it by morning. I'm kidding. Joking.
No, you won't, because you don't have everything yet. Are you? I'm not sure. I mean, some of these things are analysis that may take, even into May, but I'm not sure that, those will matter as much. I mean, do you want to look at the 29th?
Yeah, I was thinking even just an extra week buys us time to think it through, and if we have additional questions.
Well, so we'd have to, I mean, end all be all, you have to make the decision and be on the ballot and file by beginning of August, right?
Yes.
Correct.
So we got July, June, May. We got 6 meetings in between now and then.
No, but Phil, we have to vote on it to be done by August 5th. We have to vote on it at the 2 meetings in May as well.
July.
So July, sorry. So July and August.
Yeah.
Are out because it's really like a 6-week process. So we have to have made our decision.
Gotcha. So we have May and June. We have 4 meetings scheduled between now and then.
Right.
So that probably gives us time, but what about the 5-year forecast update, Ashley? When you need to put something in there with regard to our plan?
Yeah, that has to be filed by the end of May. So we have to approve it at the May 20th. Is that the board meeting?
Yep.
So, I mean, we would do our best, but putting something in the 5-year forecast does not tie you to a decision. We want it to be as accurate as possible, but I don't think it forces your decision. You as the board need to take the time that you need to make the decision to do what's best for our students and our taxpayers. So I would put what we're talking about at that point in the 5-year forecast. We would file it. And then if decisions were made that change that, we would look ahead to November's forecast, and we can create that at any time.
Well, I feel like we may have the information that we need to do our best work to go into the 5-year forecast at this juncture. Like I said, I don't think we need the level of detail on what cost reductions would entail as far as the list, but we just need to have a general idea of the amount of cost reductions that we need to be able to achieve. And then looking at the comparison that you're going to do on what our revenues would be and how that affects us with our levy cycle. So if you were able to get that to us in a week, is that reasonable within like a week to 10 days? So that we would have at least a few days to review it prior to the May meeting? I feel like we could have a discussion at the May
6th meeting.
I think the only thing I would disagree with in that is
us to keep monitoring the economy and determine what exactly we want to do.
I think the only thing that I would consider or disagree with is I think you do need to understand what the cuts actually are to some level. To say you need to get to a million, let's just throw a 1.5 million and, know that 80% of that's coming from a staffing perspective, go do it. I'm not sure that gives you enough of an insight into the impact and to understand what that decision means. That would be my only, I guess, caveat to what, what you said. I think you need to understand as a board when we throw dollars out, what is actually not for sure going, but what is the impact on the educational program?
I agree with you, Bob. I think that is important. I guess where that makes a difference is whether or not we ask for 7.9 this fall, because both the scenarios that came up today, either doing less millage in the fall or waiting a year, are going to entail about 5 million in cuts over the next 5 years. They're very similar. Mm-hmm. So if we see on that list that there are things that we can't stomach, then it means changing the approach for this fall to something north of that 3.85. Mm-hmm.
or the longevity of it for sure. Yeah.
So if we could include in the board report of like, well, so let's say, what if we included in the board report, end of next week, that'd be give a week and a half. I mean, otherwise we would just have the weekend before the May 6th meeting. So if we had it in the board report a week from this Friday on the 24th of the variety of options, kind of detailing those options, what are the impacts of them? That would give a good opportunity to communicate that to the board members so that we could fully discuss it, on the 6th.
Yeah, I would just, and I'm not going to speak for, it's easy for me to email Ashley and say, here's a potential. She's got to price it out. And some of these are requiring bringing outside consultants in to do studies. So just know there may be some blanks in that, X is being looked at, but we need information or we need feedback from consultants. So anything internally that we kind of control and do, even on the self-insurance, I'm assuming that the broker can give us a rough idea or already has.
Yeah, we've got that.
So just be aware of that. There are some things that we've put out there, or I've put out even as of today, that are going to require some time to study, and know that information, will be forthcoming down the road. But again, some of these may not be, most of them are not actionable this year. They're going to be fiscal year 21, 22 cuts.
Yeah. Yep. Okay. Any other discussion?
Wait, sorry, Bob, I missed the last thing you said. It was something about when the cuts would be coming.
I said the majority of what we're talking about and proposing, I mean, what Ashley reviewed at the beginning of the meeting are already things we had identified either throughout the course of the years as opportunities and already implemented because they didn't require board action, like aid, 1 FTE of aides. We lost 2 part-time aides we absorbed. You didn't take action on that, maybe not aware of it, but that is a cost measure that was done this year. Most of what we're looking at now is going to be actions that would be taken if we choose to go that direction in fiscal year 21 and 22. There's going to be very little that we can implement with the time of where we're at in the year is the point.
Right. Well, right. We're almost at the end of our fiscal year. And yes, absolutely.
Okay.
All right. So just to summarize, we have about $500,000 in savings, and between 300 that was already identified, 200,000 on COVID-19 savings that are going to be one time this year. On top of that, you're going to look for, what if we do 3.85 in this fall in November and make it last for 3 years? That's kind of, so stage 1 is what you've already identified, the $500,000. Stage 2, let's call it, what does it take to get to 3.85 for 3 years? And then stage 3 would be, and we have to see what this number is, what is it if it's 7.9 in the spring and it lasts 4 years? Did we say?
Yes.
Yeah. So I guess 3 different levels.
Yep.
Okay. And then we'll try to put that in the April 25th board report so that we can all absorb it before the May 6th meeting. Okay.
And I will, just to put on your radar, some of these will involve, I think, personnel. So some of the conversation may have to happen in executive session. So we'll have to talk through that.
Right. Okay. All right. Any other discussion? Okay. Seeing none. Thank you, Ms. Brudno. Move on to the audience participation. Dr. Hunt, Ms. Brudno, have you gotten any notification of folks that have things they'd like to bring up?
I have not.
I have not.
All right. Okay, moving on. Consent agenda items. So can I have a motion for consent agenda item 7A?
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
All right. Is there any discussion? Okay. Ms. Brudno, would you please take the roll?
Mr. Rankin,
Yes.
Mr. Kanziger,
Yes.
Mrs. Bros,
Yes.
Mrs. Garvey,
Yes.
Mrs. O'Toole.
Yes.
Okay. Next, we have superintendent's recommendations. Can I have a motion for superintendent's recommendation 8A through 8E?
So moved.
I'll second.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Hunt, would you like to speak to any of these?
Sure. Item A is the annual open enrollment recommendation. Again, just a reminder to the board, we have a priority kind of structure in terms of open enrollment. We're not recommending that we expand open enrollment going into next year, so we're limiting to staff members that have students in the district. Item B and C, B is the certified non-renewal list and C is the classified non-renewal list for this year. We would typically at this meeting approve contracts for next year. However, I'm still trying to work through the evaluation process and get to a resolution with our CFEA union and how to wrap up our continuing contract folks. So I'm hoping that in May we'll be able to add contracts for next year onto the agenda. Item D is second reading of policies. I don't know, Mary Kay, if you wanted to mention or talk about, I know there's some tweaks that were made.
Sure, and it's the first reading, not second.
Oh, I'm sorry. My apologies.
That's right. So, yeah, I went over these last meeting. Most all the recommendations were OSBA updates. Nothing significant that we wanted to change on our own. I want to thank Catherine for pointing out something that got dropped from a current policy that is now be put back in. So I want to open it up. Does anyone have any questions on these policies? I don't want to repeat what I said last meeting unless you want to hear it.
Would someone just give an overview of the new required policy on graduation?
Right.
Yeah, you want me to do it, Bob, or do you want to?
You can go ahead. I'm just trying to pull it up.
Okay, that was IKFC graduation plans for students at risk. Basically, beginning in 9th grade, you have to make sure you're tracking students that are they on track for graduation and notify parents and guardians if that isn't the case. I don't believe this policy is a required policy. It will not have a lot of effect on us in Chagrin Falls. But I mean, we do usually have several students that aren't on track. So this just puts more procedures in place that we will have to document, but we don't expect that this is going to be a huge endeavor for our district.
Yeah, it's not a significant change. I think we do a good job of tracking this, maybe a little formalize the process that's already in place. I apologize, I got booted out of board pack for some reason. The tracking that really around graduation with the new requirements is good. That was, expected to be a challenge is more around the monitoring of the new seals and who's qualified and not. We will bring, I hope, to the board presentation here in probably June, a software package that we've worked with. Amy Harker's taken the lead on working with Transio, and we have a real nice way of tracking not only community service now, but those seals. So students have a real good idea on where they stand with all of those. That was really one that I was worried is going to add a ton of work to us, but I think we found a system that is going to make that very simple, very easy for our staff and for our parents to follow as well.
And I too got logged out of board pack, and I now have the policy open too, if anyone has any additional questions. But I mean, it's a required new policy. So, and we did not make any changes from what was required at this time.
The only clarification I have is students taking classes prior to 9th grade. It has to be by a teacher holding a license for high school and is designated by the board as meeting high school curriculum requirements. Does the board have to designate every
I will check on that. I don't believe we have to approve that. We, handle that from a certification standpoint, making sure that we only allow teachers that are certified in high school or secondary to teach at the younger level. So I don't believe that it requires board action, or at least it hasn't in the past, but I will follow up on that.
We have students that might do like a writing program at Hawken in 8th grade, and it's a high school teacher there, but the board hasn't approved that writing program. I'm just wondering what level this needs to be monitored at for the middle school students.
Yeah, I would, obviously we would monitor for the classes we offer here. If in that scenario, and I'm thinking it would almost have to be a credit flex option where the student fills out a credit flex plan, wants to apply for it, and we kind of evaluate it and approve it, in that way.
Okay.
The only other item I would point it out is item E was added late. The E-rate window is closed, and we needed to take board action on our continuation of internet services with LGCA, and that's a 5-year contract. We've been with LGCA for a long time for internet services. We did shop this around a little bit and made some considerations, but especially with everything going on and the importance of internet, Mike Doherty, I will use the word beg. You're out there, Mike, that we not make a significant change to internet services over the summer currently with everything going on.
Okay.
And I see that is a 5-year contract and it's pretty much fixed. So I don't think we kind of know what our cost for internet service will be for the next 5 years.
Correct. And just as a reminder, and I know most of you know this, LGCA houses a lot more than internet service for us. We handle all of our student information system, fiscal is housed there. So to break this component away, that creates, could create some issues as well.
Got it. Okay, any further discussion? All right, seeing none. Ms. Brudno, will you please take the roll?
Mr. Rankin,
Yes.
Mr. Kanziger,
Yes.
Mrs. Burns,
Yes.
Mrs. Garvey,
Yes.
Mrs. O'Toole.
Yes.
All right, next up, treasurer's recommendations. Can I have a motion for treasurer's recommendation 9A?
So moved.
And second,
Second.
Ms. Brudno, would you like to walk us through this item?
Sure. I think we're getting pretty used to the reports. I haven't made any significant changes to these in a while, so I won't go through in detail. I do want to point out, though, that last month it looked like our tax collections were down. That was because of the timing of when our Geauga County taxes were received. Now that March is reflected, those taxes were all received in March. You can see that our tax collections actually are higher than we anticipated for the year. So that's great. That will be worked into the 5-year forecast as well and included in all of those scenarios that we talked about earlier. So I just wanted to point that out. Our revenue right now is up from where we estimated, and our expenditures are down. So a little bit of good news on the financial side. Everything else here I think is pretty self-explanatory. Nothing significant to point out. Couple different reconciliation items on the reconciliation from March. That one there that is the receipt was posted to the book after month end. That was just because when people left and went and started working from home, we had a receipt that we didn't know what it was from. We didn't know which bill or who, actually we knew which bill it was from, but they didn't turn in a receipt on that. And because they weren't in the building to figure it out, we had to get the books closed, so we had to carry it. I believe that has been posted since. And all of the banking information is pretty consistent. So that's it, unless there are questions.
I see that public utility personal property tax look like it had a nice, was considerably higher than budgeted. That's
For the month of March, yes, but if you look at the next general fund summary where it was the revised one, again, that was a timing issue. We don't expect to collect it for April. So yes, we received 600,000. We expected 3, but we also expected 3 in April. So that one's pretty
just
close
a
to what we.
little- Yeah, so just a little high by year end. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, that one's just a timing issue.
Gotcha. Okay, any other discussion? Yes, they are nice reports. I appreciate it. They've been consistent. They're very easy to understand. Thank you. If you could please take the roll.
Mr. Rankin,
Yes.
Mr. Kinziger,
Yes.
Mrs. Bros,
Yes.
Mrs. Garvey,
Yes.
Mrs. O'Toole.
Yes.
Okay, does anybody have any other business they would like to discuss?
I had one question. It actually relates to our next meeting. I recall putting something on the calendar with regard to strategic planning. Bob, maybe you can give us an update on where that is and if the board is going to be doing anything with strategic planning at the
Yeah.
next meeting.
I'm glad you brought that up. I have a call in with Chris right now. A lot of what was supposed to be happening right now was focus group interviews and data gathering in that regard. And I put everything on hold. He offered to do that via phone or Zoom. I think with everything going on, I'm not sure we're going to get the feedback that, is relevant to kind of, the district in terms of how we're operating on a normal basis when everybody's in this mode of kind of distant learning. So I'm going to work with him on kind of revamping what that plan looks like. I don't anticipate a finalized plan, just to put on your radar, coming to you in June. I'll give you an update after I have a better idea on timing. I think the feedback is very, very important. I just am very concerned on how this incident would impact kind of what we hear back. I know last time we did a community survey around strategic planning, and it came off right after Sandy Hook, and everything in that survey was about safety and security. And I would worry that the same kind of thing might happen here. But certainly if the board has a different opinion or thoughts, just let me know.
Well, is it worth considering pushing out the strategic plan timeline and just setting goals for, keeping the existing strategic plan and doing some goal setting for this year?
Yeah, that's kind of what I wanted to work through, was timing with him and then bring a proposal for you for consideration. That's kind of what I was working on in the background right now.
So are we holding the pre-meeting timeframe for May 6th that we had penciled in?
I would not, no.
No, okay.
The question might be, and I need to get some clarification from legal, do we want to have an executive session during that time? But let me get some prior to the meeting if we're going to make decisions in May 6th about the kind of the levy and where it goes. But I need to get advisement from legal on that.
Okay, anything else? All right, moving on. The next meeting that we will have then will be May 6th at 6 p.m. Beyond that, can I have a motion for adjournment?
So moved.
In a second?
Second.
All right, we're finished. Thank you all very much.
Take the roll.
I have to call roll. Wait,
All right,
Mr. Rankin,
yes.
Mr. Kinzinger,
Yes.
Mrs. Bros,
Yes.
Mrs. Garvey,
Yes.
Mrs. O'Toole.
Yes.
All right.
Thank you.
All right, everyone. Stay safe.
All right,
Thank
thank you.
Night.
Mike Doherty, stay on with me, please.